It was just another photograph in a sea of forgotten moments, a sepia-toned rectangle of cardboard lost in a dusty box. The label, written in elegant but faded cursive, read, "The Harrington Family, Summer Excursion, Sterling Cove, 1905." For Elias Vance, a freelance historical researcher with a penchant for the overlooked, it was precisely the kind of artifact that made his work worthwhile. He had acquired the collection from an estate sale, a jumble of letters, receipts, and photographs that once constituted the entire recorded life of a family he'd never known. The Harringtons, according to the sparse documentation, were a well-to-do New England family, their wealth rooted in textiles. The photograph captured them at the zenith of their prosperity, a perfect portrait of Edwardian comfort. In the foreground stood Alastair Harrington, the patriarch, his posture ramrod straight, a thick mustache concealing his upper lip. His hand rested proprietorially on the shoulder of his son, a boy of about 10 named Julian, who squinted slightly against the sun. Beside them, Eleanor Harrington held a parasol, its lace fringe casting a delicate shadow over her face. Her other hand held the small gloved hand of her daughter, Clara, a girl with wide, serious eyes. They were posed on a grassy bluff overlooking the ocean, the waves of Sterling Cove a gentle, frothy backdrop. It was idyllic. It was perfect. It was a lie. Elias almost missed it. His eyes, trained to spot water damage, chemical decay, and the telltale signs of photographic manipulation, were scanning the image for technical flaws. He noted the fine grain of the silver gelatin print, the impressive depth of field achieved by the large-format camera of the era. He was about to place it in a protective sleeve and move on when his gaze drifted past the smiling family, beyond the sun-drenched bluff, to the dark, craggy cliffs that formed the far side of the cove. These cliffs were known for their treacherous, sheer faces, a wall of granite and shale battered by relentless sea. They were considered utterly impassable, a dramatic but empty feature of the landscape. But they weren't empty. There, nestled in an alcove high on the cliff face, was a figure. It was small, rendered indistinct by the distance and the limitations of the camera's lens. At first, Elias dismissed it. A shadow, a peculiar rock formation, a smudge on the negative. But the longer he stared, the more the dismissal felt like a denial. It had the unmistakable silhouette of a person, head, torso, limbs. It was standing with an unnerving stillness, a dark vertical slash against the pale gray rock. It seemed to be looking directly at the Harrington family, directly at the camera. A cold knot tightened in Elias's stomach. He pulled out a high-magnification loupe, the kind used by jewelers and archivists, and pressed it against the photograph. The image swam into focus, the silver particles resolving into sharper shapes. The family's faces became clearer, their expressions more nuanced. Alastair's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Eleanor's grip on her daughter's hand seemed a little too tight. And the figure on the cliff, it didn't become clearer. It only became more wrong. It wasn't just a shape. It was sharply defined, its edges too clean for a shadow. Its form too symmetrical for a rock. It was unnaturally tall and slender, its limbs elongated in a way that defied normal human proportions. It wore no discernible clothing, yet it wasn't naked. It was simply dark. A pocket of deep, featureless black against the textured stone. Elias felt a primal sense of unease, the kind that whispers from the ancient parts of the brain. The Harrington family was on vacation, posing for a happy memory to be cherished for generations. But they were not alone. Something was watching them from a place where nothing should be. And the camera, that impartial, mechanical eye, had seen it too. This single, silent image was no longer a simple family portrait. It was a document of an event, a quiet record of an impossible witness standing sentinel over a stolen moment of peace. The story of the Harringtons, Elias realized, wasn't about their vacation. It was about what stood behind them, To understand the photograph, Elias Vance knew he first had to understand the family. The Harringtons were not public figures, their names absent from the grand histories of industry and politics. They were quietly wealthy, their legacy contained in municipal records and the archives of the local historical society. It was there that Elias sought out Marcus Thorne, a man who had been the chief archivist for 3 decades. Marcus was a living index of the region's past, his memory a more reliable guide than any card catalog. When Elias presented the photograph, Marcus adjusted his spectacles and leaned in, his breath fogging the glass for a moment. "Ah, the Harringtons," he murmured, his voice raspy from a lifetime spent in dusty rooms. A peculiar case. They were titans of the local textile industry for 2 generations. Alistair Harrington was a shrewd businessman, but by all accounts a private, almost reclusive man. This photograph, Sterling Cove, yes, this would be from their last summer of prominence. Marcus led Elias through towering shelves of leather-bound ledgers and acid-free boxes. He pulled one down, its label reading Harrington Family Correspondence, 1890-1906. Inside, nestled amongst business letters and household receipts, was a small, leather-bound journal. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor Harrington. Eleanor was a diarist, Marcus explained, carefully turning the brittle pages. She wrote almost every day. Her entries are mostly mundane, notes on the weather, social calls, the children's lessons. But her tone changes, right around the time of this trip. He found the relevant section. The entries from the summer of 1905 began with cheerful descriptions of their journey to the coast and the charming rental cottage they had secured. She wrote of Julian's delight in collecting shells and Clara's quiet fascination with the tide pools. But a week into the vacation, a new theme emerged. July 14th, the entry read, "Alistair seems on edge today. He insists we not walk near the northern cliffs, though the view from there is said to be the most splendid. He speaks of a feeling of being watched. I confess I have felt it too. A strange weight in the air, a sense of eyes upon us when we are quite alone. I told myself it was merely the isolation of the place, the sound of the gulls carrying on the wind." Elias felt a chill trace its way down his spine. The entry was written on or round the very day the photograph was taken. He read on. July the 16th. The feeling persists. Julian mentioned it this morning. He called it the tall man on the rock. When I asked him what he meant, he pointed toward the impassable cliffs and said he sees a man there sometimes standing very still. Alistair was furious. He forbade the boy from speaking of it again. But I saw the look in my husband's eyes. He has seen it too. The journal provided a terrifying context. The figure wasn't just an anomaly on a photographic plate. It was a presence felt by the family, a source of growing dread that had infiltrated their idyllic retreat. The photograph wasn't just capturing a moment. It was capturing the very thing that was tormenting them. Elias looked back at the image, at the forced smiles and the rigid postures. He was no longer looking at a family on vacation. He was looking at a family under siege. Marcus found another entry, dated a few days later, the handwriting noticeably more erratic. July 19th. We hired a photographer from the village to capture a family portrait, a memento of our summer, a foolish vanity. As we stood on the bluff, the feeling was overwhelming. It felt as though it were right behind us, its shadow falling over us though the sun was bright. I held Clara's hand so tightly I fear I hurt her. Alistair's smile was a mask of iron. We all felt it. We all knew it was watching the proceedings. The photographer saw nothing, of course. He commented on the fine weather. He was blind to it. But the camera is not a human eye. I wonder, with a coldness in my heart, what its glass lens might have seen. The entry ended there. Eleanor's premonition was horrifyingly accurate. The camera had seen it. And now, more than a century later, so had Elias. The photograph was no longer just a mystery. It was evidence. But evidence of what? A local madman who had somehow scaled the cliffs? A shared delusion brought on by the isolation of the Cove? Or something else entirely? Elias knew he needed a different kind of expert, someone who could dissect the image not with the tools of a historian, but with the cold, impartial precision of modern technology. He needed to see what was really hidden in the shadows of that cliff face. The photograph was scanned at an astonishingly high resolution. Each silver halide crystal converted into a pixel, the analog past translated into digital data. Elias sent the file to Dr. Lena Petrova, a forensic imaging analyst whose work typically involved clarifying license plates from grainy security footage or identifying suspects from blurry photographs. When she received the 1905 portrait, she was intrigued. Her lab was a world of sterile white surfaces and humming machines, a stark contrast to the musty archives where the image had been found. "The first thing we do is analyze the medium itself," Lena explained, her voice calm and methodical as she manipulated the image on a large monitor. "We look for signs of tampering, double exposure, physical alteration of the negative, chemical manipulation in the darkroom. The Victorians were masters of photographic trickery, especially with so-called spirit photography." She ran a series of algorithms, software designed to detect inconsistencies in grain structure, light patterns, and emulsion density. The results came back within minutes. "The photograph is authentic," she stated, leaning back in her chair. "The negative is clean. Whatever is on that cliff was there when the shutter opened and closed. It is not a darkroom artifact." With tampering ruled out, Lena focused on the figure itself. She isolated the area on the cliff and began applying magnification and contrast filters, peeling back the layers of time. The shape remained stubbornly indistinct. It was a silhouette, a void. "The light on the cliffs is direct and harsh," she observed, pointing to the sharp shadows cast by the rocky outcrops. "If this were a person or a three-dimensional object, we would expect to see some light reflecting off its surface, some definition in its form. But there is none. It's absorbing nearly all light that hits it. Its luminance value is almost zero." This was highly unusual. Even the blackest fabric or paint would reflect a small amount of ambient light. This figure did not. It was a patch of absolute black. Lena ran a topographical analysis, using the subtle shadows around the figure to extrapolate its shape and position. The software struggled, spitting out a string of error messages. "The data is contradictory," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The object has the clear silhouette of a standing figure, but it has no discernible depth. According to the light and shadow data, it should be flat against the rock face, like a painting, but its perspective and parallax don't align with a two-dimensional object. It's a paradox." Elias felt a growing sense of dislocation, as if the rules of the physical world were fraying at the edges. The figure was there, but it wasn't. It had shape, but no form. It was an impossibility captured on film. He told Lena about Eleanor Harrington's journal, about the family's shared feeling of being watched, about the son who called it the tall man on the rock. Lena listened intently, her scientific detachment giving way to a flicker of something else: unease. "Subjective accounts are one thing," she said slowly, "but when they start to align with objective data anomalies, that's when things get interesting." She decided to try a different approach, running a spectral analysis to determine the material composition of the dark area. The process was designed to identify chemical signatures left on the photographic emulsion. The results were even more baffling. The area where the figure stood showed no chemical signature at all. It wasn't a shadow, which is an absence of light. It was an absence of information. The silver halide crystals in that specific area of the negative appeared inert, as if they had never been exposed to light in the first place, despite being in the middle of a brightly lit scene. "It's like a hole," Lena whispered, staring at the screen. A hole in the photograph. Not damage, not a flaw in the emulsion. It's as if a perfect, man-shaped area on the negative was completely shielded from reality for the 1/30th of a second that the shutter was open. The implications were staggering. It wasn't an object that was dark. It was an effect. Something had been present on that cliff that didn't just block light. It prevented the very process of photography from occurring in its space. The figure wasn't in the picture. It was a void carved out of the picture. Lena zoomed back out, looking at the Harrington family in the foreground. Their smiles looked more brittle than ever, their eyes wide with a silent, hidden terror. They weren't just posing for a photo. They were standing at the edge of an abyss, a place where the laws of physics seemed to break down, and something had looked back. The unease Elias had felt was now crystallizing into a specific, chilling thought. What kind of thing leaves a hole in the world? Just as Elias was grappling with the mind-bending analysis from Lena Petrova, a call came from Marcus Thorne at the archives. He had been so disturbed by the journal entries that he had decided to cross-reference the Harrington family name with every other collection from that period. His diligence paid off. He had found something. It was another family collection, belonging to the Wainwrights, who had also vacationed in Sterling Cove during the summer of 1905, though their stay had been several weeks after the Harringtons. Tucked away in a scrapbook filled with postcards and ticket stubs was another photograph. "It's taken from a different vantage point," Marcus explained over the phone, his voice trembling with a nervous energy. "Further down the coast, looking back toward the same stretch of cliffs. It was taken in the late afternoon, you can tell by the long shadows. The Harringtons' photo was taken closer to midday." Elias drove back to the archives immediately. Marcus had the Wainwright photograph laid out on a viewing table under a soft light. It depicted two young men in boating attire proudly holding up a string of fish. In the background, across the water, were the familiar jagged cliffs of Sterling Cove. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't need a magnifying loupe this time. He could see it immediately. There, in the exact same spot, was the figure. It was identical. Not similar. Identical. The same tall, slender silhouette. The same unnatural stillness. The same featureless blackness. It was standing in the same alcove, in the exact same posture. But everything else in the scene was different. The tide was lower. The light was coming from a completely different angle, casting new, long shadows across the cliff face. A living person would have shifted their weight. The shadows on their body would have changed. A rock formation would have been lit differently. Even a painting on the rock would have reflected the afternoon light in a new way. But the figure was immutable. The shadows on the cliffs around it had moved with the sun, but the figure itself cast no shadow, and the light did not touch it. It was a constant, a fixed point in a changing world. It hadn't moved an inch in the weeks that had passed between the two photographs being taken. "It defies all logic," Marcus breathed, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's not a person. A person moves. It's not a shadow. A shadow moves with the sun. It's not a geological feature. Its appearance would change with the light. What is it, Elias? What stays the same when everything else changes?" The discovery of the second photograph transformed the investigation. It was no longer a single, isolated anomaly. It was a documented, persistent phenomenon. Elias immediately sent a high-resolution scan of the Wainwright photograph to Lena. Her response was swift and tinged with a professional awe that bordered on fear. She overlaid the two images in her software, aligning them using the fixed geological points of the cliffs. The result was displayed on her monitor, a ghostly fusion of two different days, two different moments in time. The families were transparent blurs, the light and shadows a confusing jumble, but in the middle of the chaos, perfectly aligned and terrifyingly solid, was the figure. "The registration is 100%. Lena's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Pixel for pixel, it's the same. There is zero deviation. To a computer, the figure in the Harrington photo and the figure in the Wainwright photo are not similar. They are the same object. The data is identical. She explained the statistical impossibility of this. Two different photographs, taken on different days with different cameras by different people under different lighting conditions, could not produce an identical image of any real-world object. There would always be subtle variations. But there were none. It was as if the figure existed outside of time and space, an unchangeable concept that had imprinted itself onto two separate moments. The implications sent a wave of nausea through Elias. He thought of Eleanor Harrington's journal entry. It felt as though it were right behind us. The family's fear wasn't just of being watched. It was the fear of something that did not belong, something that operated by a different set of rules. Lena's analysis of the second photo confirmed her earlier findings. The figure was a void, an area of null information on the negative. The phenomenon was repeatable. The hole in reality had been there for weeks, at least, a silent, unmoving, and utterly alien presence haunting the coastline. The final piece of the puzzle came from Marcus. While examining the Wainwright family scrapbook, he found a small, folded newspaper clipping from the local Sterling Cove Gazette, dated August 1905. It was a short article, a piece of local color about the summer tourist season. The final paragraph caught his eye. It mentioned that several visitors had reported seeing a strange mirage, or specter, on the northern cliffs, describing a tall, dark shape that seemed to appear and disappear. The article treated it as a fanciful piece of local folklore, a ghost story to entertain the tourists. But Elias and Marcus knew better. It wasn't a story. It was a series of witness accounts. The Harringtons were not the only ones who had seen it. They were just the only ones who had left behind a photograph of it. They had proof. The mystery of the Harrington photograph had deepened into something far more terrifying. The unease of a single strange image had become the certainty of a persistent, inexplicable phenomenon witnessed by multiple people. The figure on the cliff was not a trick of the light or a flaw on the film. It was real, in some sense of the word, and it was there for the entire summer of 1905, standing its silent, motionless vigil. The question was no longer what it was, but why it was there, and what became of the family who felt its gaze most acutely. The climax of the investigation came not from a new discovery, but from a final, desperate attempt by Lena Petrova to extract meaning from the void. If it's a hole in the data, she reasoned, then the most important information might not be in the hole itself, but at its edges. She focused her most powerful imaging software on the boundary layer, the infinitesimally small border where the figure's silhouette met the textured rock of the cliff face. She was looking for distortions, for any sign that the presence of the void had affected the surrounding emulsion. She ran a differential interference contrast analysis, a technique that detects minute variations in density. For hours, the computer processed the data, cross-referencing the two photographs. Elias waited, the silence of the lab broken only by the hum of the servers. Finally, an image resolved on the screen. It was not a clear picture, but a visual representation of data. It showed the outline of the figure, and all around it, the grain of the photograph was warped. The silver halide crystals were subtly twisted, pulled out of their random alignment, and arranged in a concentric pattern, as if drawn inward toward the figure. "My God," Lena breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like the effect of a massive gravitational field, but on a microscopic scale, or extreme cold. Something was there that was so dense, or so cold, or so alien, that it physically altered the structure of the photographic plate from a distance. It was actively warping the space around it. This was the final, terrifying piece of evidence. The figure wasn't passive. It was an active force. It didn't just prevent its own image from being captured. It exerted a physical influence on the world around it. The dread the Harringtons felt was not just psychological. It was a reaction to a real, physical presence that was fundamentally wrong. They were in proximity to something that was breaking the known laws of nature. With this chilling knowledge, Elias turned his attention back to the family's fate. Marcus Thorne had already traced their history, but now Elias asked him to look again, to search for anything that happened immediately after that summer vacation in 1905. The results were stark and sudden. According to town records, the Harrington family returned from Stirling Cove 2 weeks earlier than planned. Within a month, Alistair Harrington had sold his controlling interest in the textile mill, a company his family had built over 50 years, for a fraction of its market value. The sale was hasty, shocking the local business community. Within 2 months, the family estate was sold to a distant cousin. The Harringtons, once pillars of their community, simply vanished. There were no forwarding addresses, no letters to friends, no records of them ever settling elsewhere. The children, Julian and Clara, never enrolled in another school. The family's name disappeared from all official records after 1906. They had, in effect, erased themselves. Eleanor's journal offered one final cryptic clue. The last entry was written the night before they abandoned their vacation. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. July 21st. It is no longer content to watch from the cliff. Last night I saw it in the cove. It was standing on the water. The sentence ended there. The rest of the page was blank. The rest of the journal was blank. Whatever she saw that night was enough. It was the final straw that broke them, that sent them fleeing from their lives, from their history, from everything they had ever known. They ran not from a man or a ghost, but from an undeniable truth they had witnessed, that the world contained things that were cold, silent, and utterly incomprehensible, things that could stand on water and leave holes in photographs. Elias Vance sat in his office, the 2 photographs, Harrington and Wainwright, side by side on his desk. They were no longer historical curiosities. They were warnings. The figure on the cliff remained a mystery, a dark shape that offered no answers. It was a silent testament to a terror that had shattered a family, a visual record of an encounter with the absolute unknown. The truth of what happened at Stirling Cove in the summer of 1905 was lost to time, but its image remained. The photograph doesn't show a monster. It shows the space where a monster was. It's a portrait of a family smiling for the camera, while behind them, reality itself was being unwritten. It wasn't what they saw that destroyed the Harringtons. It was the chilling absolute certainty that whatever was on that cliff saw them too. There are countless images like this, tucked away in archives and attics, holding secrets we are not yet equipped to understand. If you've ever encountered a detail in a photograph that defies all explanation, a shadow that doesn't belong, a face in a crowd that couldn't possibly be there, share your story in the comments below.